New charges just laid against Minneapolis police officers over George Floyd's death. We're joined by our colleague at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Susan Ormiston, in Minneapolis. Susan, good morning to you. So what do we know about these fresh charges?
Yeah, they had been long awaited by the family in particular, hoping that all four of those police officers implicit in his death would be charged. And today, the Attorney General decided that they would, as you say, elevate the murder charge against Derek Chauvin, and the other three officers will be also charged with aiding and abetting third-degree murder. One detail to note, it's important that second-degree murder charge against Chauvin is unintentional, as the court complaint says. And that had been something that the family was worried about because they believed that it was intentional murder, that there was an opportunity for those officers to relieve the pressure on George Floyd lying on the pavement here, and they didn't do it for almost 9 minutes. However, the family's lawyer says that they are happy that now there will be 4 arrests, 4 charges, and that the court will see all of those officers. This memorial here, Michael, is really growing. Today is a big day here, and there are more flowers every day. The crowd is growing. It's a beautiful summer night here, and we expect throngs of people here at this so-called shrine now for George Floyd.
Okay, and what is the mood of the crowd there at the moment, Susan?
Yeah, you know, we were here earlier when those charges were announced, and there was cheers and people had their 4 fingers in the air. All four. We've heard that chant really across the United States this week. They were singing "We Shall Overcome," an anthem to the oppressed. There's a sense of levity here, more than we've seen in the past week, as people I've talked to do feel like this time it might be different, that the world is watching Minneapolis and what happens to these 4 officers, and that it has ignited such a solidarity of support and a commitment to try to at least change what some people see as systemic discrimination and racism within many enforcement police officers and police stations. And of course, there's a human rights complaint now into the Minneapolis police, looking at the past 10 years of practices to determine whether there was systemic discrimination in the way they operated. So tonight I'm expecting that there will be a celebration, is the wrong word to describe someone's death, but certainly a celebration that things are moving ahead step by step, people calling this a first step towards justice. And tomorrow here in Minneapolis, the memorial, the first one for George Floyd. His family has come here mostly from Texas. His body will then be taken from here to Houston, Texas for a funeral on Tuesday.
Susan Ormiston from the CBC, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much. Lots going on in the US as we go to air. Lisa, the former President Barack Obama, we hear, is about to speak in an online event. Meanwhile, let's zip across to Washington to our correspondent, Catherine Diss, who is covering the unfolding events there. Catherine, good morning. So after a couple of days of foment, what is the scene there in the nation's capital?
Yeah, good morning, Michael. Look, we're on 16th Street, and in the background the White House is, but it feels like as the days continue to go on, Michael, that the White House is becoming a more heavily guarded fortress by the day. If you can see in the background across the sea of protesters here that the White House is distantly in the background, and there is a line of law enforcement vehicles which are camouflaged. They look like military vehicles. They are stationed across the street and are blocking protesters from coming any closer to the White House. So that is in addition to that black fence that was constructed around Lafayette Park to stop people from approaching the building. So we've seen a heavy police presence on the streets once again. Law enforcement officers from a range of different bureaus, including the Drug Enforcement Agency, and also some prison guards that have been flown in from California to bolster the number of people on the streets here. And over there we're starting to see, we think, some people who have army strapped across their backpacks. So could be a long night here, but so far it is very peaceful here. The protesters are simply chanting. A few moments ago, we did hear them sing Amazing Grace. They all sat down on the ground. It was quite a moving moment. And just moments before that, the mayor of DC walked through the protesters and expressed her the fact that she was backing them, and also we heard from some religious leaders who were also critical of President Trump for holding that Bible up outside St John's Church.
And also, as we get aware, there is a schism emerging in the White House itself. The Defence Secretary, Catherine, Mark Esper, has said he is not comfortable with the president's threat of bringing in the army, the defence forces, to control the situation in American cities.
Yeah, that's right. Look, Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defence, gave a short press conference earlier today where he expressed that he was in contradiction to what President Trump had said earlier in the week, where he threatened to use the Insurrection Act, and that would mean the deployment of active duty troops from the military on the street. And it was a threat to other states and governors in states that if they weren't able to quell the protests, that he would enact the Insurrection Act and make sure that the military was deployed to quell the troops. But Secretary of Defence Mark Esper has said he does not agree with that. He does not believe it's necessary. He thinks it would undermine the trust of the public. And also, in another interesting development, he, after that press conference, made an order to send those extra troops home, and he's since reversed that following a meeting with the White House. We don't have much detail on that, but that is also an interesting development. But let's take a listen to what the Secretary of Defence had to say a little earlier.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
And this, of course, has caused a bit of a stir down here in DC, with some rumours swirling that the president might well decide to fire him for speaking out of line. But Kayleigh McEnerney, the press secretary of the White House, has dismissed that. But let's take a listen to what she had to say and take note of her tone.
As of right now, Secretary Esper is still Secretary Esper, and should the president lose faith, we will all learn about that in the future.
Yeah, future's not looking great for Mark Esper there, you have to say. Hey, Catherine Diss, thank you so much for that, and please stay safe there amid the crowds.